Making disciples, active apprentices following Jesus. Number 2, what is a disciple? Changes in language. Language is a living medium. Vocabulary, idioms, figures of speech change over time. Words that meant one thing a generation or two ago can mean something very different now. This is even more evident when we go back centuries in time and into cultures and languages that are foreign to us. This is the challenge for us when we attempt to study ancient literature like the Bible. We rely heavily on the translators to filter what was written in the ancient Hebrew or Greek and present it to us in words and sentences that are understandable to us. By and large, they do a pretty good job of it most of the time. Blurring of religious terms. Sometimes, however, the subtle shifts of history, traditions, and even personal experience can blur or dull what should be more crisp, clear, and specific. Growing up in a religious culture where certain terms are bandied about because they are religious can make it difficult to think and see with precision, because the familiarity of the terms as they are used in our religious traditions bleed into our perceptions of what they mean. I think this has happened with the term disciple, and it also affects our understanding about what making disciples would entail. People don't have a clear grasp of what a disciple was or what it means. How do we uncover true meaning? If we suspect that there has been some sloppiness or indistinctness that has crept in, how can we address that? How can we get back to a clearer understanding? We live at a time when we can get into some original language sources from our phones using Bible study apps. The problem with this is we don't always know how to evaluate what we may find there. Sometimes people look things up in a resource like that and choose one of the more obscure or least reliable meanings and run with that. How do we avoid that? It requires some legwork, but it is doable. Doing the legwork. In order to get a clearer grasp of the word disciple, I looked up all 261 times that the Greek word mathetes occurs in the New Testament. I listed the occurrences in columns that reflected the various usages and meanings I could see in each verse. The advantage of this process is that you see how the word is used in specific contexts, and that helps to give you a better grasp of the meaning and flavor of the word. The larger the sample, the better understanding you can get. Observations about how disciple was used in the New Testament. First, disciples were always attached to some person or group. There were disciples of John the Baptist, or the Pharisees, or those who saw themselves as disciples of Moses. All of the other 244 times the word referred to disciples of Jesus. A smaller group than the multitudes. Number 2, not everyone who came out to hear Jesus was a disciple. There were crowds and multitudes that came out to see and hear Jesus, but a smaller subset of these were designated as disciples of Jesus. And yet these disciples of Jesus were also a larger group than the 12 disciples that Jesus chose to mentor. He chose the 12 from among this larger group of disciples. Baptism and disciple making. Number 3, both John the Baptist and Jesus made disciples and baptized, and Jesus' ministry was eclipsing John's. It seems that baptism was a step in the process of separating oneself from the past and dedicating oneself to become a disciple of Jesus. In Matthew 28:19, being baptized into the name was part of Jesus' discipleship commission. The apostles understood this to mean immersing people in the name of Jesus Christ. Choosing some for special training. Number 4, Jesus called together a larger group of his disciples, and he chose 12 of them to be more personally mentored and trained to be sent out as apprentice preachers or apostles. Apostles means sent ones. The remaining 207 times that disciple is used in the Gospels refers to members of these 12 that Jesus chose. As part of their training, he sent them out to preach, heal, cast out demons, and so on. Later, we see him appoint 70 others on a similar mission. What did Jesus require of disciples? Fifth, to choose to be a disciple of Jesus meant to give him first place in everything and be willing to yield to his will in all things. There was a crisis decision to set aside the past, followed by a willingness to be rebuilt, reinvented, and redirected by Jesus. Jesus said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciples. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." Then he talked about counting the cost, and he concluded with, "So therefore, no one of you can be my disciple who does not renounce all his own possessions." That's from Luke 14:25 to 33. These are strong statements emphasizing the need to put Jesus first, before family, before self, before money and possessions. Disciple is an active role. Number 6, becoming a disciple is not a static state nor an identity. It is a process of growth and development. It is a path of learning and application of the teachings of Jesus. In John 8:31 to 36, Jesus told the Jews who had come to believe in him, "If you continue in or abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free from the bondage of sin." Study and application of Jesus' words will lead to understanding and freedom. The Greek word for disciple is mathetes. See those first 4 letters, M-A-T-H? We derive mathematics from the same root word. It described gaining insight and developing skills from a step-by-step process, especially through practice and application. A disciple is not just an intellectual learner. He or she is a pragmatic learner, an implementer. What is the goal of discipleship? Number 7, the goal is to become like Jesus. Jesus said, "The disciple is not beyond his teacher, but everyone having been fully equipped will be like his teacher." Luke 6:40. This passage adds important content to what being a disciple is all about and what healthy discipling should produce. A disciple of Jesus is in training to live and act like Jesus. The Apostle John would later write, "The one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked." That's from 1 John 2:6. If we're following Jesus, we ought to look like him. What is a disciple? Number 8, a disciple is not primarily a pupil or a student of intellectual information. The thrust of the word disciple is that of a practical learner, an apprentice, a practitioner, A disciple is not just to learn, he or she is to learn to do. That is a big difference. What about you? Have you been thinking of yourself as a ministry apprentice? Have you made the choice to give Jesus everything and embraced his lordship? Of course, you could not do it completely in one moment of time. The whole of it was unknown at the moment you made that initial choice. Part of being a disciple is to reaffirm that decision again and again. Are you willing to let him take charge, to lead you where he wants to take your life and what he wants to do with you? That's the first critical step. What do I need? Then ask yourself, what kind of training do I need to be more effective? Obviously, you can't learn it all in a short span of time. Remember, mathetes implies a step-by-step building of skills through learning, observing, experimenting, and practice. Get on the path of growth in whatever ways you can, and work at learning and implementing. Pray and expect God to bring growth opportunities, mentors, potential ministry partners, and stretching experiences across your path. You can't go with God and stay where you are. You need to be willing to try new things, change some patterns, take some risks. Other types of growth experiences. Then consider this: if the goal is ministry skill development, then we must think differently about what we need to do to grow. Corporate church meetings or classrooms, where we are mainly passive listeners, are not going to give us the experiences we need to develop skills. Some people will go the second or third mile to find places to plug in and serve in settings where they find opportunities to grow. Most people, however, do not take that extra step, and they don't even see the need for it. We need other types of interaction in order to grow. Interaction helps each other grow. The interactive dynamic of a New Testament home church gathering was a much more productive environment, if and when the people who gathered were willing to share, express needs, look for and respond to the leading of the Spirit. The physical setting may be more conducive for interaction, but we've been taught to be passive listeners. We need to take initiative to work beyond that. Each of us can come with something prepared to share, as 1 Corinthians 14:26 and following suggests. Then again, some people are more outgoing, and the quiet people tend to hold back. Working together to stretch and grow. We need to work together to help each other stretch and grow, to meet mental, emotional, and spiritual needs, and learn to partner with God to serve one another. We all need to take responsibility to watch out for the needs and interests of others and do what is best for the edification of those in attendance. We must create an environment where we not only share, but we wait upon God to work in our midst and partner with Him when He does. We look for the leading of the Spirit, then we respond. Clear meaning of disciple. At the time of the New Testament, a disciple had some very clear connotations. It implied joining oneself to a more mature and developed mentor in order to be taught, observe, and experiment under his or her oversight. The focus of the word was on skill development, not just knowledge. It was about application, not just information. It was about being an apprentice in training, not just a student. Part of the process was to become skilled enough to do the work on your own and even become adept at it enough to become a mentor to others. Jesus' command in the New Testament context. When Jesus said, "Discipleize the nations," it was in this context. The Lord declared, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, going about, discipleize the nations, baptizing and teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you all the days until the completion of the age. Matthew 28:18-20. He was expecting them to reduplicate what he had done with them. After all, he had been their discipleship mentor. Now he was asking them to do with others as he had done with them. The apostles did as they were taught. Interestingly, the believers are called disciples some 28 times in the book of Acts. And the apostles gathered these disciples into small interactive home groups, much like the group experience they had with Jesus, where they could be taught, share together, pray, and develop their ministry gifts by serving one another in the leading of the Spirit. Everyone there learned how to meet together with others. When they were later driven out by persecution, they took discipleship on the road and reproduced skill developing interactive groups wherever they went. As they were going, they made disciples. We can do the same.